So, just with this example, Obi Wan is saying truth is not absolute, right? Belief systems are not absolute, and they can in fact vary greatly from perspective to perspective, person to person.
You're listening to Path of the Jedi with your host, Ronnie Cruz.
All right, welcome to episode 4 of Path of the Jedi. We're a week in, so thank you guys for continuing to tune in. It's been a week since we've launched this podcast on September 1st, and well, for me, it certainly doesn't feel like a week. It's been quite a crazy ride so far. And I also didn't take into account that I would be leaving for a 2-week road trip the day after we launch. This episode is coming to you from the road. I'm actually sitting at a campgrounds. And so, yeah, you're probably going to hear a lot of background noise, some nature sounds, which is nice. Adds a little ambiance to the podcast, but also maybe the AC unit running in our camper. My dogs rustling around as they walk around camp. The occasional car and or truck driving by. There was also, I thought we heard a cow. It is Texas, so that's not outside of the realm of possibility that there are cattle around. But yeah, all kinds of wacky background noises. A plane just went by, or I think that was a helicopter. On top of that, I'm completely, well, I don't want to say old school, but very minimal in terms of equipment. I'm just here on my laptop sitting at the picnic table with my earbuds recording this. So no fancy equipment, and it's not even like, Bluetooth fancy earbuds. These are old school wired earbuds. So we'll see how the quality turns out, guys. I'll do my best in post production to give you guys the best quality recording as I can. But we'll see how it turns out. Some news and announcements. A lot has actually happened here at Path of the Jedi in our first week. So I wanted to fill you guys in on all of the cool stuff that's been going on. First, we are now officially listed and available on Google Podcasts. This process I thought was actually going to take anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks, but it was able to get approved, and now we are in the Google directory. So for those of you guys who are Google listeners, you can find Path of the Jedi at Google Podcasts. Next announcement is actually a milestone. As of this recording, we officially have 100 followers on our Facebook page. So, I think that makes us Facebook official. If you're not following us yet on Facebook, you can find us at facebook.com/POTJ podcast. That's going to be a really cool resource for you guys if you want to get more involved, if you want to have more discussions and share your reflections and your thoughts on the episodes and the things that we discuss here on this podcast. So again, go to facebook.com/POTJ podcast. Another really cool thing that has happened in the past week, at least I think this is super cool. In Apple Podcasts, for those of you guys who are at an Apple Podcast, when you search for Star Wars, Path of the Jedi actually shows up in the search results. I mean, it's way down in the search results, but for me as a lifelong Star Wars fan, for this podcast to show up in the search results for Star Wars is, I don't know, I love it. I will wear that as a badge of honor.
Great kid, don't get cocky.
Speaking of Apple Podcasts, huge thank you to everybody who's taken time to rate Path of the Jedi. I really, really appreciate it. Again, it helps us a great deal when you guys rate it. It helps us show up and remain relevant in the searches. So thank you again for taking time out to rate our show. If you haven't done so, please feel free to give us a rating, no matter what it is, good or bad, because it also informs me whether or not I'm doing a good job. So again, thank you for everybody who's taken the time to rate it. A special shout out to user Ready to Grow. Ready to Grow has actually gone above and beyond and not just rated the podcast, but also left a review, and a glowing review at that. So Ready to Grow, thank you so much for leaving that review. Thank you so much for your kind words. I really, really appreciate it. I commit to you guys to continue to do better. And this kind of feedback really, really is very encouraging. And again, it can inform me on how I can do better. All right, final update for today. I just finished reading Into the Dark by Claudia Gray. Into the Dark is a part of a series called Star Wars High Republic. It's books, comic books, and I believe manga as well that introduces us to, number one, a whole new cast of characters in an age and era that takes place 200 or so years before episode one, Phantom Menace. And so, yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible, this series, at least what I've read so far, expanding the Star Wars universe, introducing us to an age that, in my opinion, is really like the golden age of the Jedi Order. So these have been really fun to read. Into the Dark is the second book in the series that I've read. The first one was Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. And I just now started reading Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland. Now I bring these up. I bring up these books for well, a couple of reasons. Number one, reading is fundamental, right? I feel like reading is a huge, huge, and very, very important aspect of personal development, which I can talk more about in a future episode. But yeah, just reading is just good for you, right? Number two, you don't have to have an in-depth or intimate knowledge or even be familiar with Star Wars at all to enjoy these books, right? And I think that can be said about not just this particular series, but all the canon books post Disney that have come out since Disney came into the picture, and also all the expanded universe stuff that came out before Disney. I think, yeah, all of these books as standalones are incredibly, incredibly enjoyable, and lead to my third point in bringing it up is that there are a lot of lessons that you can learn from all of these, right? With Into the Dark in particular, the one that I just finished, I actually have a ton of notes and highlights from that particular book that I'm going to be sharing with you guys in a future episode. So lots of reasons to pick up a book, especially Star Wars books.
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Okay, so I chose this particular quote because, well, aside from Obi Wan being one of my favorite characters, this quote is so incredibly relevant and timely with just everything that's going on in the world, and people's inability, I think, to relate, communicate, and connect. So this quote is from Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. The scene is when Luke is on Dagobah about to leave again, and then he's visited by Obi Wan, who appears to him as a Force ghost, and they proceed to have this conversation about why Obi Wan wasn't forthcoming with telling Luke the truth about what happened to his father. Because in the previous movie, for those of you guys who don't know, Darth Vader is Luke's father. Spoiler alert, right? And one of the most famous moments in cinema history. And so in this scene, Luke is confronting Obi-Wan and pretty much asking, why did you tell me that Darth Vader killed my father when in fact Darth Vader is my father? And that's where you get this quote, right? Obi-Wan goes on to explain that when Anakin chooses to align himself with the dark side and then become Darth Vader, in a real sense, Darth Vader kills Anakin. Anakin no longer exists. And for me, that is everything that he's talking about in this quote, right? When he's saying that the truths we cling to depend greatly on our point of view. Obi-Wan has not only justified to Luke why he lied, but he's, I think, more than anything, justifying it to himself, right? Creating this truth for himself to make it easier and more palatable to live with the fact that he's lost his best friend, his brother, and his student, his Padawan, to the dark side, right? We can really talk about it in a sense that Obi-Wan is justifying his own failure as a teacher, as a master, as a friend, and as a brother. And that's why he shares this story with Luke the way he shares the story with Luke, that yeah, Darth Vader killed your father, Luke. what we see, by the end of the movie is that Darth Vader is in fact not irredeemable, and that Anakin still actually is alive. So, Luke's perspective, Luke's point of view, actually wins out in the end, and arguably this is why people call Luke the Hope, right? The new hope in the galaxy. So, just with this example, Obi Wan is saying truth is not absolute, right? Belief systems are not absolute, and they can in fact vary greatly from perspective to perspective, person to person, right? Now, before we go on, I want to distinguish between two things. I want to be very clear about this. There is a clear difference between truth and fact, right? Fact exists, right? Fact exists in the material world, in the material realm. Fact exists in the mathematical, in the informational realm, right? There is fact. Truth, I think, is more the meanings that we assign to fact, and the belief systems created as a result of those meanings, right? And so you can see there that truth can, because of perspective, vary from person to person, because all of us are living and perceiving life and the world around us in completely unique and different ways, right? So each of our truths can be vastly, vastly different. Now, one thing that really stands out to me about this quote is the word cling, right? Obi-Wan says, "You're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our point of view." To me, the word cling connotes active choice. So Obi-Wan essentially is saying that the beliefs we have or the truths that we hold on to, we're holding on to by choice, and that we don't have to necessarily hold on to them. And as we mentioned earlier, the truth that Darth Vader killed Luke's father is a truth that Obi-Wan has chosen to believe. Now, in the real world, we see this playing out in all aspects of life. For example, let's just look at fandom, right? And Star Wars fandom in particular. One person's truth about a particular film or series or even character can vastly differ from the next person's. With every new property that Star Wars Lucasfilms releases, you can have an infinite number of different truths that people experience with those particular properties. And really, it's just differences in opinion, right? Opinion is the meaning they've assigned to fact, and that meaning becomes their truth, right? That becomes their truth. This particular movie is bad. Definitively is bad. That is my truth because I don't like it, right? Right? And that's completely different from fact. I think you can give insightful critical analysis objectively, separate and outside of however you feel about any particular thing subjectively. And things go terribly, terribly awry when you go from I don't like a particular thing to that thing is bad and wrong. Here then lies the risk. Truth, once it becomes really, really anchored in, becomes belief systems. And people will defend belief systems even if it means risking their own destruction. This is exactly what happened with the Jedi Order. The Jedi adhered to a certain set of teachings and philosophies. And over time, those teachings and philosophies, or at least the interpretations of those things, solidify themselves into truth, right? And then truth over time becomes rules, becomes dogma, which then becomes rigid fundamentalism. And it's that rigid fundamentalism, that strict adherence to truth, or at least what the Jedi Order believed was truth, that resulted in their downfall, that resulted in their destruction, that resulted in Palpatine and the dark side being able to manipulate circumstances around them to causing the fall of the Jedi Order. So not understanding that truth is a matter of perspective can be very, very dangerous. Case in point, and this is a very extreme example. I just watched a video this morning of an individual on an airplane who, as a result of his truth being violated, demanded to be let off the plane. Now, the crazy thing about the situation is the plane was still in the air, but this individual was so convinced of the rightness and perhaps righteousness of his truth that he wasn't hearing or seeing or understanding the factual reality of the world around him, that the plane was still, in fact, in the air. Now, I know this is an extreme example, but it's an example nonetheless. And when you multiply this by the factor of entire societies, or let's just even take a look at the entire Jedi Order, that strict adherence can dangerously lead to self-destruction. And here's where it gets even more insidious, is that sometimes the truths that we cling to aren't even truths that we came up with on our own. Sometimes the truths that we cling to are truths that were fed to us by other people. Case in point, Luke's truth that Darth Vader killed his father wasn't his own. It was given to him by Ben Kenobi. Thankfully, Luke heard another perspective, and in this case, it was from his own father, Darth Vader, who shared this information with him, and he took that information and he formed his own opinion. He formed his own truth. And arguably, we can say that in doing so, Luke not only saves his father and helps his father redeem himself, but he saves the entire galaxy from the tyranny of the Emperor, right? So yeah, we gotta be careful of that strict adherence to of what we think or believe is true, because as Obi Wan said, the truths that we cling to depend greatly on our point of view. I think the most important thing that Obi Wan has learned from this, albeit posthumously, is that on the other side of the truths that we cling on to, the truths that we defend, that we validate, that we rationalize and justify, is another human being who, like us, is just trying to navigate their way through this crazy thing called life.
This party's over.
And there you have it. That is it for this episode. I'm sure there are going to be many, many perspectives about our topic today. So please share those with me. Let me know what you think. Write or send an MP3 to info@pathofthejedi.com. I would love to read your thoughts, read your comments here on the next episode or in future episodes, or play your MP3. We want to hear your voice too, right? We want to hear your perspective and your truth about this episode. Also, if you're not already following us on Facebook, don't forget to follow us. It's facebook.com/POTJ podcast. One last thing, if there's anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to here on the show, I would love to do that for you. Email us at info@pathofthejedi.com. Let us know who you want the shout out to go out to and what your message is to them. And that's it for today. Thank you again for tuning in to episode 4 of Path of the Jedi. We will catch you again next week with a whole new fresh episode. So until then, be well, be safe, and may the Force be with you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company nor Lucasfilm Limited and is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names and sounds and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is intellectual property of Path of the Jedi unless otherwise indicated.